Hey, what's up guys, it's your boy Evan here, and today we have my Nightrose Premium deck profile. I actually already made an article about this, so this is more just the video portion of it, more of a condensed version. So if you want the more in-depth explanations as to why my list is as it is, the link will be in the description below. And as usual, special thanks to Jaime for giving me the platform to actually share my thoughts with you in a more paragraph missile manner. So in this deck profile, it's going to be more of a Zarzan build, quote unquote, but honestly, it's the leanest engine in the game right now, especially since Granblue can abuse it. But at the same time, there's also other sub-engines in this deck that makes this deck so much more fun and not as linear as just our regular Zarzan build. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and without further ado, let's get started. So to start this deck profile, we have our G-Zone. I feel like it's best to go from G-Zone all the way to the grade 0s, like in my article, just that there's a bit more of a coherent consistency to this. So we're going to first start off with our Cyclones. We have 4 Cyclones for the reason that it is the main bulk of the Zarzan engine. It's a Krill Elemental, so it helps with your tier, and flipping multiple face up just basically makes all your vanilla units and boosters gain 5k power that stacks. Really useful against some lockdown decks. It was really useful in terms of like hitting magic numbers, especially on a bad bounty turn. So honestly, a lean engine, and it's the best flip target you have in the G-Zone. Next we have Bad Bounty, which is the literal endgame of this deck, and it's so much more consistent with the new support. So Bad Bounty is just a quote-unquote restanding Vanguard. You rewrite and then you have another Vanguard attack. This is something that Granblue really needed, especially against control decks, but it's a much bigger quality of life change in terms of aggression, because aside from our general multi-attacking, we now have 2 big Vanguard attacks, and our second Vanguard attack also has Battle Phase Calling, which is also why the main decks changed a little bit from the regular premium decks, because the Battle Phase Calling mechanic got a lot more stable now. Next we have Big Obadiah. Big Obadiah is our main first stride unless we literally open the nuts and we have every single card that we ever need for a Bad Bounty, or at least a more optimal Bad Bounty, so we don't have to filter. We can just go straight to Bad Bounty and try to end game. But for the most part, Big Obadiah is our first stride. And it's just a hard filter 5, board calling, and in this deck you will always generally call 4 on the first stride, regardless of how many is face up in your G-Zone. If you get a Cyclone face up, you get to call 4. If you don't, you still get to call 4. And we run a second copy because it actually can be an alternative endgame, because you're still filtering 5 cards, you're still compressing your deck. So the second copy is just there as an alternate game ender. Next we have Immortal Galleon, a really free GB8. Hitting GB8 in this deck is super fast and consistent now. So having a strat that just says, oh, I get to call 5 units for free with 10k static power buffs is super nice, and it's just basically another failsafe card. So let's say you're out of counterblast and you have very minimal deck, but you can still drive check. Okay, Immortal Galleon, because I'm probably GB at that time, and you just call full board and just go in. And then Megiddo got really nerfed because of Bad Bounty in terms by comparing them, but for the most part it's still there because it's still a quote unquote consistent game ender. It's more or less a third strike game ender now, because whatever he can do, Bad Bounty can do better, and you have 2 Vanguard attacks with Bad Bounty. But he's still here because there are still games where he does clutch with the column switching ability, and the fact that here you require no hand and no board setup for this card other than 2 CB and, you know, the ultimate stride cost. For G guards, we have the one Negro Mode and Negro Lily. These actually are the same card. One's just Soul Blast cost, one's a Counter Blast cost, as well as a Retire cost. So the main reason why I run these 2 is so that you have a choice in what you want to use. You want to use Soul, or you want to use a CB and Retire to get the shield. In this deck, drop zone is not really turboed, so you're not really going to get a big drop until your second stride turn, because you're going to be using your entire hand to guard and board build. So for the most part, you're going to have at least minimum 10 to 15 cards, usually around 10 at the end of your first stride turn. So that means that these 2 cards have roughly the exact same shield value. So for the most part, it's just between the Soul Blast and Counter Blast cost and Retire cost that you're really picking from, and that choice is super helpful because sometimes you need the Soul for Negro Nora or for your next turn to CC, and so you can just use this for the CB and just use CB instead. Other times you have a plentiful amount of Soul and you just want to maximize the amount of cards in drop zone, so you can Soul Blast and get the shield there. We have one A Gleam, just a drop and draw another Krell Elemental card for tier so that you can CC more, but it's just your generic first G Guard because it can stop most initial attacks, especially on the first stride turn of your opponent's deck, and it's just a hand filter. And to Neganora, it's the best G Guard in the game. It's the biggest G Guard because with a Soul Blast one, you can call, I believe now you can, this G Guard right now by itself can be as big as a 60k shield base, and of course it does have the perk of being a superior PG, which it gets around so many decks and so many one-shot combos. So that's the G Zone. Now let's move on to the grade 3s. So now we have the grade 3 lineup. I'm super excited to talk about this because, in my opinion, for this specific deck build, this is the most optimized grade 3 list. Of course, when you mix and match and change different cards in different grades, the grade 3s may be subject to change as well. But for the purposes of this deck profile, this is the most optimized grade 3 list I can conjure up or theory craft at the moment. And test, of course. For the most part, before I even start, I understand there's like 3 printout SPs here. My SPs are coming in the mail. There's other cards in the main deck that have printouts in it. So just addressing it now before I get shanked for that later. So Nightrose is the main reason why Bad Bounty is our second stride kill turn now, is just because having a Vanguard attack that has the battle phase calling ability is super helpful, as well as her static 5k buff to units just elevates the amount of power that we can give during our kill turn, as well as it actually makes our grade 2 game or our non-striding game super effective, because if we can't grade 2 game anymore, we can ride up to grade 3 and then punish them, because we will always guarantee at least 2 attacks that are hitting around 20k value in terms of shield. Like, they're demanding 20k in shield at the very minimum per attack. And the reason we run 4 is because it's your main grade 3, right? And it is what you want to see. If you don't see it first in premium, it's not that big of a deal as long as you get a protect gift. That's the main goal as your first grade 3 ride, but you really do want to see her on your Bad Bounty turn. Next, we have Skull Dragon, big beat stick, staple beat stick, probably will never go away in Grand Blue. Not much else. Night Storm is only a one-of. It's our attack extender. Horrible ride target, but an amazing attack extender. And it actually doesn't hurt losing him anymore because, like I said during Bad Bounty, our battle phase calling got so much more consistent. So let's say, for example, you lose Night Storm. You still have Nightrose, and she has a battle phase calling, and you can do a standard plus combo where you can do Nightrose, and then you can do a Dragon Columbard column, and then call her Skull Dragon. So, like, that's just an example of a standard plus battle phase attack. So if you really lose this card, it's not the end of the world, but it does help in terms of quality of the battle phase that you do have this card. And next we have the One Night Miss grade 3 Break Ride. So this card is more of a secret tech, as I've said in my article. It's just because the fact that this is in your hand, the moment you add this card to your hand or your opponent has knowledge of this card, they basically have to end you in their next stride turn, or they basically have to not give you limit break as best as they can, because the moment you get limit break, this card just goes bonkers. It's a quality of life card, meaning if you lose it, it's not the end of the world, but if this card's active, your battle phase is extended by 2 attacks, whether that be 2 Skull Dragon attacks, another Zarzan combo on a different column, a board controlling column, a draw column, it doesn't matter. It just extends your battle phase by at least 2 attacks. That's its main goal, as well as builds your soul, while also benefiting the fact that you're getting 2 calls during battle phase. Its main purpose here is just basically to extend attacks, but also to instill fear in your opponent if they're a higher level player, because if they face my deck specifically, or a deck that has the Break Ride, especially if you see like the Break Ride premium build, they know for a fact that they have to kill the Grand Blue player before they even get the Break Ride, or if the Grand Blue player gets the Break Ride, they have to be able to survive at least like 6 Skull Dragon attacks, or at least 7-8 attacks that are over 50k, and this deck can easily do that, especially with the Zarzan columns, the vanilla columns. So for the most part, that's a grade 3 lineup. We do run the 9 grade 3s. It's a bit lower than before, but it's just because we have a bit of a tighter lineup in the grade 1s because of the vanilla units. So now, let's get on with the grade 2s. So to start off this grade 2 lineup, we have to welcome B-Series Columbard. This card is one of the most overloaded cards for premium that Grand Blue has gotten, next to Greed Shade of course, but for the most part, I love this card because not only did it actually slow down the game exponentially for Grand Blue, it also punishes your opponent for simply just giving you a Counter Blast on your grade 2 turn. Unless your opponent has a Zarzan engine or an engine that can cause them to generate 30k columns on their grade 2 turn, they're basically not going to beat this engine or even match it. So Columbard is a skill with CB1, filter any card and then call it. That's why you can fetch a Zarzan engine, you can fetch a draw engine, you can fetch a CC engine really early if you really need to Soul Blast for more shenanigans. But for the most part, it's just there for the Zarzan engine and just to instill fear in your opponent for giving you that CB. So let's say you're going first, and if your opponent decides to pass turn on their grade 1 turn just to deny that damage or to guarantee to deny that damage, you can just not ride up and tap your grade 1 Vanguard and swing again, forcing your opponent to either stay on grade 1 and not attack again, or ride on grade 2 and give you the damage, or ride grade 2 and not attack again. Either way, you're plussing. It's either they give you the damage and you go full on ham and you generate a board of Zarzan and Vanillas while getting GB and filtering your hand, or you don't get CB but you manage to deny your opponent of drive checks. This card is super good in the fact that it just slows on the early game, which is Grand Blue's main weakness. Really, is just the early game. If we can get the second stride, we just straight up hard win at this point. There's very few times where you don't win on second stride, and that's just either by unfortunate defensive trigger sacking or just 6 damage healing by your opponent generally. And next we have the 3 grade 3 vanilla 15k shield. Nilde, simply just part of a Zarzan target. She increases the quality of hand shield die because she is a 15k shield, and the 7k base does kind of help with damage denying, especially in a mirror matchup, so that you can still tap the Vanguard and still do a drive check, and hopefully have a rear guard so you can just siphon all the triggers that you get on your drive check onto that rear guard so you don't give your opponent damage. For the most part, just a Zarzan target, but really impressive shield value. Next, we have Greed Shade. So with Greed Shade, I understand you guys are going to ask, why only one? Greed Shade is a really, really good card. Yes, he is a really, really good card. He is a hand fix. But at the same time, he's actually a very conditional card that costs too many slots in the deck. So if you notice right now, we have 9 Greed 2s in the deck. This is so that we can maximize the Zarzan engine to just min-max it, while also making sure that Columbard is the first unit that we see with the most probability. You want to see Columbard first, as well as your vanilla grade 2 for the sake of the Zarzan engine, which is what you're really going for in the grade 2 game. And seeing anything else will really slow down your grade 2 game, and if you do get the CB, like I said, you're not going to pop off, and that's probably going to cost you the game, unfortunately. Greed Shade's purpose is just to fix hands, so we can just mill it off Obadiah, then hand fix once. That's all you really need, for the most part, after all my testing, is that you need to fix your hand at certain points in the game, but that's usually on your first stride, and you only really need to fix your hand once, meaning you have to replace one card to really optimize it because of how much you compress the deck. With Greed Shade, if you want to run it optimally and you want to be able to use it early and consistently, you have to run it as at least a 3 to 4 of copy. And that's an issue here, because running too many grade 2s means we're not going to see Columbard more often. And even though we do get to quote-unquote filter our hand and mill the deck, that's not really plussing you anything. You're basically netting even on your hand. Yes, you're getting a drop zone, but that drop zone's RNG. The quality of that drop zone is not guaranteed every time you mill 2, right? So taking that into account, I put Greed Shade as a 1 of copy, and I moved its value to the stride turn for the most part, just so that I can either get a Night Miss, a heal trigger to survive, or it's a convenience card. I see it in the early game with another grade 2, cool. That means I can mill 2 to hopefully get 2 important units in my drop zone and fix my hand in the process. And he also has some really like niche plays with the Nightrose, because there are times where you can actually end on the Zarzan engine, but you're short 1 vanilla, so you can use Nightrose and call a Zarzan Greed Shade, then use Greed Shade to mill 2 and ditch 1 and add a vanilla to hand, then use Zarzan to call another column. So it's one of those really neat little interactions that are niche, but it still comes into play sometimes. I think that's all I really have to say for Greed Shade. Its value did diminish in the early game, but it still has an amazing value as being an overloaded card in a vacuum. However, with Columbard the way it is and the fact that the Zarzan engine exists, it's just honestly not that worth running multiple copies and just sacrificing that early game. And last, we have our Ghost Ship. Ghost Ship is just a generic beat stick that also gives us a draw. 24k beat stick flat by itself, and it's a mandatory draw, but that's really a good scaling card. Ghost Ship is the fastest scaling attacker that we have, because regardless of your drop zone, you just straight up have a 24k beat stick that draws. So if you have Zarzan in hand already, or you just damage check Zarzan, you can just use Columbard into Ghost Ship and just get a draw while at least demanding a 15k 20k shield from your opponent. So before we move on, I just want to reiterate that the point of this deck, at least until you get to your second stride and your board building, is to have a quality drop zone, not a quantaful drop zone. I think that people are just tunnel visioning on the massive amount of cards in drop zone for big undead dragon numbers, where you don't really need to do that. This deck has enough engines where, of course, you can have the massive undead dragon drop zone shtick, but you also have the massive vanilla engine columns with Zarzan, while you're also having the standard plus aggression, right? Never forget that you have two other engines aside from the undead dragon engine that you can use offensively. So next we have our grade 1. So first off we have Negrabone. Negrabone is honestly low-key a hard carry in this deck. In terms of bad bounty and other strides that do not generate board, he is your only board building card, while also refueling your deck without actually resetting the RNG. So Negrabone is actually a hard carry in this deck because other than board building, he also fills up your drop zone because you're discarding a card. So that's why you still get a massive drop in bad bounty even if you're not milling here. And also in the early game, he actually has a really neat trick, and it's actually your main ride target in this build, because if you ride him first and you get the Zarzan combo off with Columbard, you actually Soul Blast the Negrabone with Zarzan, and then if you have two more vanillas after you resolve Zarzan's skill, you can actually use Negrabone and then get a second Zarzan off. So you usually have to call over the Zarzan with the vanillas, but at the same time you should be able to gauge at that point whether you can get the next vanilla. So if you have like 3 vanillas in hand at the start of your turn or at the start of the game, you can effectively just Columbard into Zarzan, Soul Blast this, use the 2 vanillas to call over a Zarzan and to call it an another rearguard circle, and then if you draw another vanilla, then you can Negrabone, discard a card, and then Zarzan again. So essentially you're discarding 2 for the turn, but you're getting 2 face-up GB cost. You went through like 4 cards on top of your deck, and now all your vanillas gain plus 10k. So yeah, that's a little interaction with Zarzan that I found, and that's actually super clutch sometimes when they, again, give you the counterblast. Otherwise, it's just a board building card that's super underrated for its worth. So if you are running 4, good job. If you're not running 4, I suggest you increase it to at least 3, because this card really is essential for a bad bounty turn. Next we have 4 Mechira, Zarzan target, 15k shield, basically same as grade 2. There's nothing else to really discuss about that. And next we have Tyr, our main CC engine in this deck. So spoiler alert, we do not run the G Grenache, and that is because it is too slow. So if you do run the G Grenache, that's totally fine, but it's honestly just too slow of a card, because it being hollow means you only get the CC2 at the end of turn, and with how fast this deck flips GB, and especially flips Elementals, which is Cyclone, on your grade 3 turn, you can essentially CC1. By the end of your first ride turn, you can CC3 immediately. And if you just G-Guard once with Algim, or you can Nora and then flip Algim, you can essentially almost CC4 cards. And honestly, what's good about this is that you can use Negrabone to call Tyr. Even if you have 10 cards in drop, it's a grade 1, so you can Negrabone in the Tyr. But generally, on the second strike turn, you usually also do this so that you can dump your soul even more. So you can have a maximum amount of drop, but also having the minimum amount of soul to do all your shenanigans. Which is like, you know, Zarzan loop in the battle phase if you need to, or you can just go with the generic Dragon beatdown. And also it's a 6k base, so underswinging is also a thing. Useful sometimes. Just figured I should mention that. Next we have the one Dolph the Ghosty, a PG for Negranora, so we have the superior PG, as well as a decent ride grade 1, because it's a quality of life card. Again, if you see it, you see it. If you don't, you don't. But if you ride into it, you get to draw an additional card on top of your V4 and then discard a card. So you basically went through another 2 cards on top of your deck. Next we have Mistoff. Mistoff is a hand restrict card. So this card, honestly, in this grade 1 lineup is a flex spot. This can be another Ripple Banshee. This can be another vanilla unit. This can be a Fatal Shade. This card can really be anything, but I chose Mistoff because it hand restricts. Against certain decks where you can live off an 8-card hand, meaning that you can live off like 2 G-Guards, and the rest is essentially just massive shield value, like 30k Sentinel crit, or just 15k shield, you can call Mistoff on your Obadiah turn and just nerf your opponent down to 8 cards, especially if they're a massive hand building deck. But for the most part, it's also like a sub-engine. So let's say you lose Zarzan in your grade 2 game and you're against a deck that generates massive hand like OTT. You can basically play the grade 2 game and call Mist off. Because there's a certain point in decks like OTT where they want to write to grade 3 so they can start plussing even more. And Mist off basically says that they have a hard hand limit of 8. Your opponent having a hard hand limit of 8 going into your stride turn means that you can recover faster and you can output a more reliable aggression, because with 8 cards in hand, they're more than likely going to take more of your attacks, especially because in your first stride, you usually only have 4 attacks, which is basically the 2 Ghost Ship attacks, the 1 Nightstorm attack, and your Vanguard attack. So making sure that most of them land is kind of important. That way on your grade 2 turn, you can just end game. It's easier for this deck to end game when your opponent's at 4 damage rather than 3 because, you know, defensive trigger sack. But for the most part, it's better if they're at 4. And the way you can do that, and then indirect way you can affect that is if you hand restrict your opponent on your first stride. So Mist off is there for that reason. You don't have to run them. You can run any other grade 1 in this slot, or you can move this to grade 2s or 3s. But again, it depends on how the deck functions for you. And I feel like adding any more grades to the grade 2s or 3s will just mess up the overall consistency of the deck. Next, you have the 1 Tempest Sphere. Tempest Sphere is basically a 2nd Zarzan and a 5th Columbard. The point of Tempest Sphere, if you get in the early game, is so that you can hopefully fetch 2 vanilla cards, whether it be heals, a crit trigger, or any vanillas. Basically any vanillas, you can just get off Tempest and it flips you a GB. Otherwise, this card also has a niche use as a first stride target, because you can greed shade into this card, so you can then use this card to hopefully add certain vanillas to hand. Because if you don't see your heals early game and you're like at 4 damage and you can filter 5 normal units, you can use greed shade to get Tempest so that you can hopefully get your heals in hand, because your heals are super valuable in this deck. You just don't see heals because you're for some reason missing them. So you have like a 25 card deck, but you're still not seeing any heals via damage or via all the draws you got off Zarzan. You can just Tempest Sphere them and you'll probably hit them in your top 7 or at least 1. If you don't, then at least you get to shuffle your deck and reset the RNG. So hopefully you can hit it on your drive check. And next we have Ripple Banshee. Ripple Banshee is basically like a 2nd Ghost Ship. It's just important in this deck to have at least 2 draw cards. So if you damage check 1, you always have the other to fall back on. And it's a Soul Blast cost, so you can min-max your soul even further. But for the most part, you don't use this card unless your Ghost Ship gets damaged, or you just need the extra draw and you have a surplus of soul for whatever reason in the early game because you managed to soul charge crits earlier on in the game. And lastly, we have, of course, Zarzan, the menace of the deck, and he got restricted to 1. The restriction to 1 for Zarzan, honestly, is the best thing that could happen to Grand Blue, because before, when every deck could run this, it was very toxic. It's literally Zarzan or bust. But now, because it's limited to 1, only a few select decks can actually reliably search Zarzan, and the decks that do search Zarzan are very toxic because they can loop Zarzan. And thankfully, we are one of those few decks. So if you can use Zarzan and abuse it, then we should, because it's a really good engine to have in the deck. It is the main engine of this deck because it's just that reliable. But if you lose it, you still have other engines you can rely on because we are Grand Blue. A really good battle phase caller, a really good hand filtration, and a really good deck compression. So this card, aside from the fact that, you know, it calls during battle phase technically, it just compresses your deck so fast. So because we're not milling a lot in this deck, we have to rely on other cards such as drawing to really filter our deck or to get cards in our hand. You don't have a lot of drop zone on your at the end of your first stride because you're drawing all your cards and you're like going through your deck. And that's honestly better than milling it, because when you mill cards, it's like, oh, I have 2 more cards or 3 more cards in drop zone because I milled, but I don't get any value of it. Whereas if you're drawing it, it's in your hand, so it's at least another stop before it gets to the drop zone. If it's a heal, I can G-guard. If it's a 15k shield, I can use that. And because you're drawing cards, you're inevitably calling cards onto your field. Even if you're calling a heal, which just sucks at times, that heal could be a 20k booster at that point, and that's such a good booster number that it can basically make anything hit magic numbers, requiring a Sentinel crit, 20k shield, or even a G-guard at times, honestly. So Zarzan is a really good abuse card, and I'm glad it's in this deck. And overall, the way this deck flows is super nice and not at all linear. So I hope you guys got something from this grade 1 list. And again, you can change this grade 1 list to really fit your style. You can mess with the ratios and stuff, but for the most part, this is the most stable and most controlled ratio list for this deck. And now we have our grade zeros. And now we have our grade zeros. So for grade zeros, we have, of course, the 4 V heals. They're the vanilla heals because Zarzan targets, and they're 10k triggers, so they just help in drive check. And your heal triggers because you want to survive and you want to have G-Guard fodder. Next, we have 4 vanilla crits. 4 vanilla crits again for the Zarzan target, 10k crits, 15k shield. And for triggers, at least, if you are running Zarzan, have at least 7 vanilla triggers. 7 vanilla triggers is really pushing in terms of consistency. And honestly, for me, having 8 vanilla triggers is the safest number to have. It's not too much and it's not too little. It's more of like a nice Goldilocks zone in most games. Next, we have the 1 Rough Seas Banshee, the OG. So why we run the OG Rough Seas Banshee, even though it's only a 5k trigger, is because it's a soul charging card. And it's also an optional draw. There are times where the optional draw does come in handy when you have like 4 cards in deck and you need the soul but you don't want to draw. So you can just punch it in the soul and not the draw because it says draw up to 1 card. But its main goal is to be an on-demand soul charge. Because in this deck, the only way to really soul charge is with your critical triggers. And Wild Seas Banshee is an on-attack soul charge and your Vanguard has to attack. For the most part, that's okay because it's on your first stride anyway. Or you see in the early game, so it just beefs up your Vanguard attack, basically guaranteeing the attack to hit or forcing a PG or a 30k Sentinel crit to be dropped. But there are times like in your bad bounty turn where you just short 1 soul to do your tier or to optimally do Zarzan at least twice in the battle phase. So you can call Rough Seas via Negro Boner from your hand to just soul charge just to give yourself that 1 extra soul. So you're still building the optimal field to hit magic numbers. So you still have like vanilla boosters, you still have either vanilla attackers or a Night Storm vanilla or 2 Undead Dragon attackers. And while you're still fueling soul. So the whole point of Rough Seas Banshee is to basically fuel your soul without compromising your board state during your bad bounty turn. Next we have 2 Rampage Shades Sentinel crits, just 30k shield Sentinel crits with a 10k trigger value again. Really good with Negronora, and it's just a quality of life G-Guard. Having that 30k shield is honestly super helpful, especially when there's like battle door effects where you have to guard with multiple cards in hand. If you're gonna guard multiple cards in hand at a time, you might as well guard with the 30k shield in it so you can just guarantee attack to never hit. Next, we have 2 Chad the Ghosties, which is your stride fodder. Basically, we're running 11 grade 3s, just a way to just consistently get the stride. And next, we have 2 Wild Seas. Wild Seas is there for the soul charging engine, again with Rough Seas, but this is a more aggressive way to soul charge because you can boost with it first and then you can put in the soul for Vanguard. And seeing this in the early game, if you pull off a Zarzan or a Tempest, is super nice because then you can just call onto board and then your Vanguard's 10k bigger. So if it's a vanilla Vanguard, it's 10k bigger. If it's Column Bar, then you have a 19k Vanguard base. Super nice, nice quality of life card, and it's a 2-up because you basically want to see the Wild Seas Banshee, Chad the Ghosty, and Rampage Shade in equal quantities for the most part. That's why 2-2-2. I don't know how much more I can explain it. 2-2-2. You want to see them equal amounts. There you go. And we have the 1 Gus Jin PG, just because we still do want at least 2 PG targets for Negronora so we can guarantee the Superior Perfect Guard. And honestly, that 1 draw does come in handy sometimes, where if you hit it on your drive check or defensively, you get to add an extra card in hand. As well as 11 crit is really safe still. You can still do 12 crit if you want to, but I feel like 11 crit is super safe. And the 1 drop PG, in my opinion, just comes in clutch sometimes. And this doesn't compromise your grade 1 lineup any further to accommodate the PG slot. Again, you can run a second Dolph in your grade 1 slot if you really wanted to, but I didn't want to compromise that 1 slot for a PG where I can just move it on here and just down my crits by 1. And lastly, we have Grenache, a V Forerunner right here, on ride, draw a card. If your opponent's grade 1, quick shield. And yeah, that's basically the deck profile. Any other explanations as to why I have the deck as it is will again be in the article and the link down below. So this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. If you have any more questions regarding this deck list, feel free to comment down below, as well as check out the article again, because I actually explain literally every card in detail, why I picked the card for this deck and how it is optimized and how they synergize with each other, as well as with some like example pictures of how boards should look like rather than what I just told you over the deck profile. this deck is not linear, which I believe that the Zarzan engine gets a bad rep for just being a linear deck. It's just meant to abuse a card. Yes, it's meant to abuse a card because it's a very consistent and lean engine, but this deck doesn't feel linear at all. You still get punished for being a suboptimal player, and even though you can do a Zarzan build and you can generate vanilla cards and go unga bunga smash, it can be more optimal. You can punish your opponent more, you can draw more, and honestly, the Zarzan is still a glass cannon. You can still do the Zarzan build and not build any hand at all and just get slapped in the face and just realize, oh, I messed up and I could have played even better. This deck is super fun because it's still testing your limits as a player while also just rewarding you for just improving yourself. And if you're a newer player and you want to try this deck, sure, it'll still give you a nice feel for premium without being too overbearing. Because yes, you have the Zarzan engine, but you can just ignore that until you feel comfortable using it. And when you do use it, it'll just spoil you basically. So that's the end of the deck profile, and the only thing I can really say to really wrap up this deck build is, I didn't mention it in the deck profile, but this is still a Protect 1 deck. There's only a few games where you want to go Protect 2, especially now because Nightrose Force retires your board. But in the games where you are going Protect 2, it's just for mainly aggression, or if you're against a deck like Luard and you really just need the intercepts. Or a multi-attacking deck where PGs are not really going to do you much, so intercepts are a thing too. But just remember, your main Vanguard now does retire units, so ride accordingly, build your board accordingly, build your hand accordingly. And with that, that's about it. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.